All right, what's up, guys? So today we're going to be doing a quick market analysis. I'm just going to go over a couple thoughts, a couple ideas. And first, let's just discuss the fact that Bitcoin has continued its uptrend, right? My last real YouTube video that I did, we were trading somewhere around here. And I remember saying the fear for anyone who is sidelined is absolutely the uptrend that has now proven to you that we are in an uptrend actually goes on and continues uptrending, right? That is the fear, and that's exactly what happened. We continued to break out both immediately after that video was published. We then broke down in short term, high time frames still maintained, right? We're assuming that the high time frame trend takes priority here, and it does. Any sort of weakness that we managed to show during this drawdown gets absolutely negated with the retest of our previous range highs, along with these 4-hour 200s, which we're using to kind of portray the overall higher time frame trend, right? In addition to that, if you're going to use something like market structure, it's very simple. That's a low, that's a high, that's a higher low than that low, right? That's a higher high than this high, that's a higher low than that, that's a higher high, that's a higher low, that's a higher high, that's a higher low. This is now a higher high. The trend has not broken, right? It's very simple. The same argument that we've been making since July 18th, when the trend goes favorably bullish, is not broken here today. It's still the exact same arguments that we were making, 3 weeks ago, right? So we refuse to be coping complacent. We acknowledge the uptrend and took price action at face value for what it is. And in the meantime, we've been rewarded. So from here, we're either right or forced to adjust, right? I made a mistake. I humbly admitted my mistake in assuming that a weakness, portrayal or whatever based off of lower time frames would lead to a lower high on the daily, and a lower high on the daily is in hindsight or it's really the first stepping stone to a much larger bearish argument, right? And to be fair, after we go on and break our 4-hour market structure, right? So that's a high, that's a higher low, that's a higher high, right? So I'm assuming somewhere in this candle that we're going to go on to break our 4-hour market structure, and if we break our 4-hour market structure, then in hindsight, this is a lower high on the daily, right? And to be fair, that is exactly what we did. We broke our 4-hour market structure. We kind of locked in the idea that, yeah, you have now found a lower high on your daily chart, but the trend still didn't break, right? We knew that the daily was still technically looking for a higher low. We knew that we're still trading well above these 4-hour 200s, and they're likely to act as that higher low to our daily chart, right? To where that daily trend. We're also well above this previous range high, right? So we have a lot of bullish arguments still. So it was wrong of me to just outright assume that from right here, this tiny little showing of weakness would kind of cascade its way and plague the higher time frames and make everything bearish across the board, right? That was wrong on me, on my part. And I acknowledge that as well. I even said, hey, I'm speculatively assuming, right, prior to the actual trend breakdown, that the trend is actually going to break down. I let my instincts, right, the fear of where the market is at in terms of, relative kind of context, I let that kind of take priority over the very 10-year-old simple analysis of we're heading up. So guess what? We're probably going to continue heading up, right? And you're going to be able to continue justifying that 10-year-old analysis as long as things like the daily market structure continues uptrending. We're still trading above these 4-hour 200s, right? And in a beautiful world where everything is butterflies and dandelions, all our lower time frames are also in agreement with that notion. Everything is bullish across all time frames, and in that case, when that's the case, right? When we're in the midst of a leg upwards, the only bearish argument is the fact that our weekly is still downtrending, right? And again, a 10-year-old can tell you this. It doesn't take a genius to be able to say, hey, you know what? As of the past 9 months or so, we're downtrending and we still are downtrending. The problem with that analysis is it's inactionable. Although it's a valid sort of analysis, it's not actionable. There's a lot of white space left in between to where we could still argue that weekly analysis, right? We could still argue the idea that the weekly is still downtrending all the way up here. It would still be just as valid of an analysis as it would be at this bottom as it would be at current price, right? It doesn't really matter at the moment. It's not something we want to put merit on. It's not the priority, right? We want to prioritize whatever is more actionable in terms of high time frame context, and that's exactly how we were able to kind of adjust back here and ride this trend. And I know this isn't the greatest example when we're talking about Bitcoin, but when you apply this exact same mentality to something like ETH, a much greater example, this is your reward, right? You have been rewarded with a very simple context. I mean, take it at face value for what it is, right? July 17th, 18th is around the same time where we're going bullish on the market, on the market as a whole. And we've seen an additional 40% push upwards, right, at minimum, in sort of agreement with that analysis, right? We got rewarded. The same mentality that rewarded us back then is the same mentality that is still true as of today. And it's not really negatable, right? We can't really apply any sort of current bearish argument to negate the fact that this is an uptrend. It has been an uptrend. It's still an uptrend, right? Who knows? Maybe, just maybe, this uptrend continues to such an extent to the point where we can no longer argue our weekly downtrend idea, right? There's not really going to be a point or any sort of appeal to want to continue to argue that thesis of, hey, as of the past 9 months, you're still downtrending, because we won't have a way of portraying that thought and justifying it. I'm again using something like this random fucking gray box that I have drawn on my chart, right? Which is totally arbitrary. That's why I perceive resistance. But in confluence with that, I'm using something like these 200 daily moving averages, right? Which have gotten pretty well respected as of the past couple years for ETH, right? So I want to pay attention to them. They're locally relevant, they're historically relevant. That's what I'm going to use to portray the weekly trend, right? So the thought is, as long as the uptrend continues uptrending, the threat of not adjusting, right? The fear of not adjusting down here, over here on this trend retest, on the higher high, when we break out above this resistance, the fear of not adjusting to that price action is that the uptrend that is an uptrend actually goes on to continue uptrending, not only just to this region, but potentially even above, right? And at that point, if you are still the person who's arguing a weekly sort of downtrend, right? A very, very, very macro thesis of, yeah, you know what? We can go to 2,300, but it's not going to matter because that's going to be the weekly lower high. And we're just going to go on to, $300 ETH, and ETH is going to go to zero and blah, blah, blah. And the merge is a sell the news event. If that is your hope, right? And that is your sort of last resort, that's where you draw the line. But that's also what you're betting on. You've done a terrible job. You have not adjusted. You have sat there coping and complacent for all of this, not only just the range trading, right? Because the range in itself is a 25% range that you can absolutely milk by using a range trader's sort of mentality. But further than that, when the range breaks and we actually develop a new trend, right? And to be quite honest with ourselves, the trend is quite clear. It's very simple. And again, a 10-year-old can tell you that this is an uptrend, and it's an uptrend along your 2-hour 200s, right? Oh, look, these 2-hour 200s did pretty damn well at portraying the downtrend in the first place. They obviously got chopped up because we're trading in a range trader's environment. So we're probably not going to apply a trend trader system, right? People always say, yeah, Merc, you're probably getting absolutely fucking destroyed in this market environment. And I'm like, no, because the greatest traders not only understand when to apply their indicators and how to use their indicators, they know when not to use their indicators, right? I always discuss you don't want to be a robot. You don't want to have, this sort of monotone and static take and approach to everything when the market is dynamic. The market adjusts. You have to adjust with it, right? So I made a mistake by assuming and scaling my assumptions too hard, but I knew that the market didn't agree with my assumptions just yet. Right. So I knew that I was kind of putting myself out there to be very much disappointed when my instinct doesn't really fucking matter and it gets rendered useless. And the 10-year-old simplistic system ends up taking priority and continues to reward the trend, right, in the favor of the trend. It continues to reward all those trend traders because they managed to trade the trend. I knew that that was the case, right? I let context kind of influence my bias, my take on things. That is my fault. If we're being honest, that's the first time, right? The pre CPI data, this spike here, is the first time in the past 2 years that your boy has not been on the right side of a trend move, right? When it's this sort of massive kind of move, 7%, 10%, 15% move in the direction of the trend. And I have not been exposed to it in a significant manner other than, my ledger or whatever. That's the first time in the past 2 years that this has happened. It's also the first time that, or it's not really the first time, it's also one of the few times in the past 2 years that I've let instinct kind of influence my decision instead of just simply taking the market at face value for what it is. So, what does that tell you, right? I'm prone to mistakes just as well as anybody else. So, I'm human too. But these are my mistakes. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, the market hasn't changed. The market has not changed. There's still just as much of a threat of continuation of uptrend here today, just as much as there was at 1930 when we're testing, midterm resistance, just as much as there was at 1660 when we're retesting this exact same key trend for ETH, right? The same exact sort of bullish arguments that we have, higher highs and higher lows on the daily, break out of a month long range, right? Month long 25% range. These are all higher highs and higher lows, still well above something like our 2 hour 200s as well as our 4 hour 200s. And if we're going to be honest, any sort of nice deep pullback into this region is technically a buy the fucking dip opportunity towards the next leg upwards, right? Only after we lose something like this, right? And we lose the same bullish arguments that allowed me to ride this wave in the first place so that I had the luxury of being the coping complacent person who is closing out of all their exposure here, taking profit and flipping massively bearish only to be proven wrong, right? The same sort of analysis that gave me that luxury would then be broken here and no longer justifiable. That's when it goes invalid. That's when all of a sudden you recall back to the weekly trend, right? You say, hey, you know what? All of these lower time frames are now in agreement with what the weekly has been telling us for the past 2 months and 9 months, really, right? But more specifically, the past 2 months. During all this uptrend, our weekly is still bearish. We just don't really care about it until either we get somewhere over here, right? And then from there, that's like a pivot point. We either pivot our high time frame bullish in agreement with our local trend again, right? Or our weekly trend takes priority and then we kind of smack everything back down. The only other way that we would start to recall towards the weekly trend once again is after we lose our strength and we no longer have any sort of bullish arguments on these lower time frames, and all of a sudden our ideal buy the dip opportunity is now our invalidation to our macro sort of bullish thesis in the first place. It's always just a constant ebb and flow with whatever the market is doing. I managed to kind of fall off the wave here a bit. I still managed to kind of very much reward myself with all this uptrend that has occurred in the recent month or so. But I did fall off the wave, so it's my job to kind of readjust and look for more opportunity, whether that means zooming into lower time frames or hoping and praying, and sitting, coping, complacent, and staying sidelined and hope and pray that something arises that is just massively appealing, like maybe selling some ledger exposure or whatever at 2300, or maybe opening up some massive shorts in the event that my ideal sort of spot buy swing long region does not hold and we break down below it, right? So it's my job to kind of adjust from here. I put myself in that position. I knew that that would be the case in the event that my system ends up winning over my instinct. And that's exactly what happened. So I hope you guys are enjoying the humility, my takes on the market, the way I perceive things. This is, and it should be, actionable analysis, right? Everything that I just discussed should be tradable for you guys. So hopefully somebody's able to kind of take this analysis, apply it to their own trading, and go and make money from it. Um, but yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Much love. If you want to donate to me, there's donation links at the bottom. I am partnered with Bybit. You get a massive discount on fees, something like 40% off of fees if you use my Bybit referral link. So shout out to Bybit. Please, if you want to support me, that's probably the best way of doing so. And yeah, much love, guys. Take it easy.